Hello and welcome to the new season of the Drawn and Redrawn, the Making of India's Internal Boundaries podcast. This is a part of a larger India State Stories project that explores the evolution of India's political and administrative boundaries. This project is an undertaking by the Centre for Legislative Education and Research at Flame University in Pune. In this new season, we embark on a journey through the fascinating histories and narratives of each Indian state and union territories, exploring the pivotal events, influential personalities, and societal transformations that have shaped the subcontinent. In this 7th episode, we trace the fascinating history of the formation and evolution of modern state of Delhi. This episode is based on a corresponding article written by our team at India State Stories. These articles have been converted to audio conversations with the help of Google's Notebook LM. You can find the relevant article link in the show notes. Now, let's dive into the conversation.
So to kick this off, I think anyone who has spent time in Delhi has this feeling. You're standing there, maybe near India Gate, and the city just feels so permanent.
Incredibly solid.
Exactly. It has this aura of stability, like it's been the unshakable center of India forever. But when we dug into the research for this, that whole idea started to look like, well, a bit of an illusion. That's a great way to put it. We see these stone monuments, and we assume political stability. But if you actually look at the administrative map, the legal reality of Delhi, it's been in a state of constant, almost chaotic flux for more than a century.
A governance puzzle, really.
It's arguably the most complex governance puzzle in the entire Indian constitution.
And that puzzle seems to come from one very specific tension. It isn't just a city, it's the capital.
Exactly. That is the core conflict driving this entire history. Delhi has this dual identity. On one hand, it's the national capital. It belongs to the union, to every citizen of India.
Right. It's where sovereign power resides.
But on the other hand, it's a living, breathing metropolis. It has millions of residents with very local, very specific democratic needs. They want to say in who paves their roads or manages their local schools.
So it's that classic question, who owns the city? Is it the central government because it's the seat of power?
Or is it the people who live and work there every day? And what we're going to see is that for the last 100 years, we haven't really picked an answer. We've just kept running experiments.
To understand the situation we're in now, with this unique national capital territory status, we have to go way back to the British era. And this is where the timeline gets surprising.
It really does.
This was the first thing in the research that just threw me. I think most of us assumed Delhi was always the capital of North India. But for a huge chunk of the British Raj, it wasn't a capital at all. It wasn't even its own province. It was just a district.
It was. And that detail gets glossed over so often. Before 1857, Delhi was actually part of the northwest provinces in Oudh.
Basically modern-day Uttar Pradesh.
Right. But after the 1857 revolt, which of course centered on Delhi, the British made a strategic decision. In 1849, they transferred Delhi
to Punjab.
Correct. They moved it into the British Punjab province. And it just stayed there as a simple administrative division from 1849 all the way until 1911.
So just think about that. At the absolute height of the Victorian era, the city of Delhi was being governed from Lahore.
That's wild to picture, isn't it?
The Red Fort is there, all that Mughal history is there, but administratively, it's just an outpost.
A strategic administrative outpost. It had symbolic weight, of course. Everyone knew it was the seat of the Mughals. But politically, it was marginal. The real center of gravity for the British was Calcutta.
Until 1911, the coronation durbar, King George V arrives and makes this huge announcement that the capital is moving from Calcutta to Delhi. Now, I've heard the simple stories, Calcutta was too humid or whatever, but the research points to a much colder, more calculated reason.
It was pure geopolitics. You have to remember the context. Calcutta was becoming a major headache for the British.
Right. The partition of Bengal had stirred up a lot of unrest.
A massive amount. Nationalism was on the rise, and the political climate in the East was just getting hostile to imperial rule. So moving to Delhi was a way to physically distance the seat of power from all that trouble.
It was a retreat to a safer fortress.
Partly, yes. But it was also about being central. Delhi is the historic gateway to India. It's closer to the traditional power bases of the north. So shifting the capital was about asserting control over the entire subcontinent from a better vantage point. It wasn't just symbolic.
So the king makes the announcement in 1911. Does Delhi immediately become its own powerful province?
No. And this really sets the precedent for everything that follows. In 1912, Delhi was designated as a chief commissioner's province.
And that term is important.
It's crucial. In the British system, big provinces like Bombay or Madras had governors and a degree of autonomy. A chief commissioner's province, however, meant you were directly under the thumb of the central government, the governor-general.
So from day one of being the capital, the instinct was, this place is too important to be independent. We need to keep the reins tight.
Precisely. The first chief commissioner was William Malcolm Haley, and his job was to run the city directly for the center.
And we should probably clarify the timeline of the physical city because people get this mixed up.
Yes. The announcement was 1911, but you can't just move an entire imperial government overnight.
Right. The New Delhi that we all know today, Lutyens Delhi, it didn't exist yet.
It took 20 years to build. The name New Delhi wasn't even officially adopted until 1927. And the administration itself didn't physically move from Calcutta until 1931, after Lutyens and Baker had finished the Rashtrapati Bhavan and the Secretariat buildings.
Okay, so let's fast forward to 1947. Independence. The British are gone. We have the hardware in place, parliament, the government blocks. Now we're a democracy. You would think the logical step would be to say, okay, Delhi, you're free. You get to be a full state. But that's not what happened.
Not at all. And this is really where the modern identity crisis for Delhi begins. When the Constitution came into effect in 1950, the framers created a classification system for all the territories, Part A, Part B, and Part C states.
And Delhi landed in Part C, which, let's be honest, sounds like the third-tier option.
It essentially was. Part A states were the big former British provinces. They had full autonomy, governors, legislatures. Part C states were the former chief commissioners' provinces.
So centrally administered?
Exactly. No governor, just a chief commissioner appointed by the president. So the people of Delhi, living in the capital of a new democracy, didn't actually have their own democratic government.
That must have been incredibly frustrating.
There was massive public pressure. So the government decided to try an experiment. In 1951, they passed an act that gave Delhi a legislative assembly and a council of ministers. And in 1952, Delhi got its very first chief minister, Chaudhary Brahm Prakash Yadav.
Okay, so they got a government, but looking at the fine print, this wasn't a real government, was it? It seems like it had very limited powers.
It was a government with one hand, maybe both, tied behind its back. The elected government could handle civic affairs, sanitation, local health, schools. But the big three, policing, land acquisition, and finance or public order, were completely off limits.
Wait, those are the exact same friction points we hear about today.
It is the exact same list. 70 years later, the fundamental structural conflict hasn't changed one bit. The chief minister in 1952 couldn't decide where to build a hospital or how to manage the police, just like the local government today can't. The center held all the important levers of power.
So this early experiment was already full of tension, and this leads us to one of the most fascinating what-if moments in Delhi's history, the States Reorganization Commission, the SRC, in 1953.
This is a pivotal moment. The SRC was redrawing the entire map of India, mostly on linguistic lines. And at that time, there was a very serious, very organized movement for a greater Delhi state.
And when you say greater Delhi, you don't just mean the city as we know it.
Oh, no. Much bigger. The proposal was to create a massive state that included today's Delhi, plus districts from western UP like Meerut, parts of what was then Punjab, and even bits of Rajasthan.
Wow, it sounds like they were trying to create a state that actually matched the economic reality of the region.
Yes. The argument was incredibly forward-looking. The proponents, I think there were 97 MLAs who signed a memorandum.
97.
They argued that you can't plan a growing metropolis if your jurisdiction ends just 10 miles down the road. They wanted to merge all the commercially linked areas into one single unit to handle things like transport, water, and economic planning.
That makes perfect sense, especially when you look at the governance mess we have now with the NCR. So why didn't it happen?
Politics and turf wars. There was huge resistance from the neighboring states, especially Uttar Pradesh. Powerful leaders like Govind Ballabh Pant fought tooth and nail against it.
They didn't want to lose their wealthy western district.
Exactly. The official argument was that breaking up UP would harm large-scale developmental projects. But really, no state wants to give up its prime territory. Pant and others argue that Delhi should stay small and centrally controlled.
It wasn't a one-sided fight. You had some heavy hitters on the other side.
Absolutely. You had B.R. Ambedkar and K.M. Panikkar, two giants of Indian political thought. They weren't just looking at maps, they're looking at civil rights. Their argument was that if you keep Delhi under central control, you're effectively disenfranchising the people who live there.
Capital or not, citizens deserve a government that's accountable to them.
Precisely. But the SRC, in the end, sided with the center. They rejected the Greater Delhi idea, and then they went a step further. They actually downgraded Delhi.
They graded? How?
They recommended removing the Part C status entirely. They stripped away the legislature, the chief minister's office, everything. Delhi became a union territory under the direct rule of the central government.
So the whole experiment was just abolished.
Abolish. From 1956 onwards, Delhi entered what you could call its wilderness years. The rationale was national interest. The commission felt that you just cannot have the central government held hostage by a state government that might, say, decide to cut off its electricity. They wanted absolute security.
So for decades, from 1956 to the early 90s, Delhi is just a territory.
A territory in a class by itself. That was the phrase they used. Even when other UTs like Puducherry got their own legislatures in 1963, Delhi was specifically excluded. The government basically said, this city is too special for democracy.
But you can't just run a city of millions with only bureaucrats. People need some kind of outlet.
They created a stopgap measure. It was called the Metropolitan Council, set up in 1966. It sounds impressive.
But it wasn't.
It was essentially a debating society. It was purely advisory. The real power stayed right where it was, with the lieutenant governor, the LG, and the home ministry.
It's interesting because while the politics are frozen for 30 years, the city itself isn't. It's exploding. The population is skyrocketing.
Exactly. And the city physically starts spilling over those borders that the SRC refused to expand. This leads directly to the creation of the NCR, the National Capital Region, in 1985.
Most people know the term NCR Gurugram, Noida, Ghaziabad, but the scale of it is just staggering.
It is massive. The NCR Planning Board Act created a planning zone that spans 23 districts across Haryana, UP, and Rajasthan. The NCR is over 23 times the physical area of the National Capital Territory of Delhi itself.
That feels like an admission of guilt, doesn't it? Like, okay, we didn't create Greater Delhi politically in the 50s, so now we have to create it economically in the 80s to manage the absolute mess we've made.
That's a very sharp way to put it. It's an economic solution to a political failure. They realize that pollution, traffic, housing, these things don't respect state lines. But, and this is the key, the NCR board is just a planning body. It doesn't have political teeth. It can only coordinate.
Which brings us to the modern era. The pressure for a real elected government in Delhi becomes too much to ignore by the late 80s.
Yes. The Sarkaria Committee in 1987 finally recommended restoring a legislative assembly. This led to the 69th Constitutional Amendment and the 1991 Act, which gave us the structure we have today, National Capital Territory, or NCT.
So we get a chief minister again. Madan Lal Khurana was the first one back in 93. But looking at the fine print of that 1991 Act, did they actually solve the core problem, or did they just formalize the argument?
They essentially codified the conflict. The 1991 Act created what's known as a diarchy, a system of dual rule. It gave the elected government power over most subjects, but it specifically carved out those reserve subjects for the lieutenant governor.
And we're back to the big three: land, police, and public order.
The exact same list from 1952. The elected government is responsible for building schools, but it doesn't own the land to build them on. It's responsible for public safety, but it doesn't command the police force. The LG always retains these overriding powers.
It seems like a setup designed for perpetual conflict. You have a chief minister with a mandate from millions of voters, but they have to ask a central appointee for permission to do basic governance.
And conversely, you have a central government that feels it has to protect embassies and parliament, so it refuses to let go of the police. It's a structural stalemate. And the stakes just keep getting higher because of the sheer numbers.
We mentioned the population explosion. The notes on this are pretty sobering.
The growth is relentless. In 2001, the population of the NCT was about 13.8 million. The projection for 2021 was around 23 million. But if you look at the wider NCR region, the projection is heading towards 64 million people.
64 million. That's a population larger than Italy, concentrated in one urban cluster.
It is. And the core question is, can you govern a mega region of that size using a semi-state model that was designed back in 1991?
It feels like trying to run a supercomputer with software from a floppy disk.
That's a very apt analogy. The legislative framework just hasn't kept pace with the urban reality. The 1991 Act was a compromise, but compromises crack under pressure. And when you have that many people living in a space where the government has to fight court battles just to figure out who's in charge of what, the citizens are the ones who suffer.
So if we zoom out, the story of Delhi is really a pendulum swing. From a district in Punjab to an imperial capital to a disenfranchised union territory, and now to this hybrid semi-state.
And that pendulum hasn't stopped swinging. The tension between national interest, keeping the capital secure, and democratic accountability, giving people a voice, it's never been resolved. Neither side has ever fully won the argument.
It almost feels like we are due for another SRC moment, another major rethink.
I think that's the thought we have to leave everyone with. We're operating on a map from the 1950s and a law from the 1990s. With the NCR becoming this economic behemoth, you have to wonder, will the current boundaries of Delhi survive the next decade? Or will we be forced to revisit the greater Delhi idea, or maybe something entirely new, just to manage this incredible urban growth?
A huge question to ponder. It seems the lines on the map are never quite as permanent as they feel when you're standing on them.
They certainly aren't. History tells us that Delhi is always being drawn and redrawn.
Well, that is all for this deep dive into the evolution of Delhi. A massive thank you to the team at India State Stories for the incredible research. You can find the link to the full article in our show notes.
And thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure exploring this complex history.
See you in the next episode as we continue to map out the stories behind India's boundaries. Bye for now.